Picture this scenario. You're in what seems like the perfect relationship. She texts you good morning every day, introduces you to her friends, talks about future plans together. You feel secure, valued, appreciated. But beneath this surface of apparent devotion, something else is happening, something you can't see, something she might not even fully recognize herself. A psychological process that transforms even the most loving woman into someone capable of devastating betrayal. What I'm about to reveal will fundamentally change how you understand female psychology and relationship dynamics. This isn't about obvious cheating or dramatic confrontations. This is about the subtle, invisible mechanisms that cause women to gradually disconnect from their commitments while maintaining the appearance of loyalty. The betrayals that blindside men completely because they never saw them coming. Today, I'm going to expose the hidden psychological patterns that drive female disloyalty. I'm going to show you exactly how women convince themselves that betrayal is justified, how they rewrite history to make themselves the victim, and why the women who seem most devoted are often the ones to betray you, most likely when circumstances change. This isn't comfortable information. It challenges everything society teaches us about female nature and romantic relationships. But understanding these patterns is the difference between being prepared and being destroyed. The men who recognize these signals early can protect themselves. The men who remain blind to them become casualties of their own naivety. Pay attention, because what you're about to learn could save you from years of confusion, financial devastation, and psychological trauma. The choice is yours. Continue believing in comfortable fairy tales, or face the uncomfortable truths that will actually protect your interests. Female loyalty operates on completely different principles than male loyalty. When men commit to something, they typically honor that commitment regardless of changing circumstances. Male loyalty is often unconditional, based on principles rather than feelings. But female loyalty is fundamentally conditional. This isn't based on ongoing emotional satisfaction and perceived benefit character flaw. It's evolutionary programming. Throughout human history, women who could quickly adapt their loyalties based on changing circumstances were more likely to survive and reproduce successfully. The woman who stayed loyal to a failing tribe or a weak partner often faced starvation or death. Those who could recognize when situations were deteriorating and adjust their allegiances accordingly lived to pass on their genes. This biological programming still operates in modern relationships. Women continuously evaluate whether their current situation serves their best interests. When that evaluation changes, their loyalty changes with it. But here's the crucial part. This evaluation process happens largely below conscious awareness. She doesn't wake up one morning and decide to become disloyal. Instead, her psychology gradually shifts as her circumstances change. The process begins with what psychologists call cognitive dissonance. When a woman starts feeling dissatisfied in her relationship, her mind faces a conflict. She committed to being loyal, but she's no longer happy with that commitment. To resolve this internal conflict, her psychology begins rewriting the narrative of the relationship. Suddenly, minor issues become major problems. Normal relationship friction gets reframed as abuse or neglect. Your positive qualities get minimized while your flaws get magnified. She starts building a case against you in her own mind, collecting evidence to justify the betrayal she's already considering subconsciously. This psychological process explains why women often seem to change overnight. The man experiences this as sudden and inexplicable, but from her perspective, she's been building toward this moment for months or even years. By the time you notice her behavior changing, the psychological groundwork for betrayal has already been completed. The most dangerous phase occurs when she begins seeking validation outside the relationship. This doesn't necessarily mean physical infidelity. It means she starts looking for evidence that she deserves better, that other options exist, that her dissatisfaction is justified. Social media becomes a weapon of mass destruction for relationships because it provides endless opportunities for this external validation. She starts comparing your relationship to the highlight reels of others. She begins engaging with old flames or new admirers, not necessarily with intention to cheat, but to remind herself that she's still desirable. Each interaction reinforces her growing belief that she's settling for less than she deserves. Here's where it gets psychologically fascinating. Women have evolved to be expert storytellers, particularly when it comes to reframing their own behavior in favorable terms. The same psychological mechanisms that allowed them to maintain social cohesion in ancient communities now serve to justify modern betrayals. She doesn't tell herself she's being disloyal. Instead, she's finally standing up for herself. She's not betraying you. She's discovering her worth. She's not breaking her commitments. She's outgrowing a situation that no longer serves her growth. This internal narrative allows her to maintain her self-image as a good person while engaging in objectively harmful behavior. The rewriting process extends to the entire history of your relationship. Memories get selectively edited to support her current emotional state. The wonderful times you shared together get minimized or forgotten entirely. The conflicts and difficulties get amplified and recontextualized as signs that the relationship was always doomed. This isn't conscious manipulation, though the effects are the same. Her brain is literally restructuring memories to create internal consistency. She needs to believe that leaving or betraying you is not only justified, but necessary for her well-being. The alternative would be acknowledging that she's destroying something good for selfish reasons, which most people's psychology cannot accept. One of the most reliable predictors of impending betrayal is when she starts talking about her past with nostalgia instead of gratitude. When she begins romanticizing her single days, talking fondly about ex-partners, or expressing regret about opportunities she missed, her psychology is already preparing for departure. This nostalgic phase serves a specific psychological function. She's testing alternative narratives for her life, imagining how things might have been different if she'd made other choices. These mental experiments gradually weaken her attachment to current circumstances while strengthening her attraction to alternatives. Pay attention to how she discusses your relationship with others. Women process their emotions through social interaction, and these conversations often reveal her true psychological state long before she admits it to you directly. When she stops defending your relationship in social situations, when she begins sharing intimate problems with friends instead of addressing them with you, when she starts seeking advice about whether she should stay or go, the betrayal process is already well underway. The most insidious aspect of this psychological pattern is how it affects her perception of your efforts to save the relationship. Once she's entered the betrayal mindset, your attempts to address problems or improve the situation often backfire. She interprets your efforts as proof that you know the relationship is failing, which validates her decision to consider alternatives. Your romantic gestures get dismissed as desperation. Your attempts at communication get labeled as manipulation. Your willingness to change gets seen as evidence that you were inadequate before. This psychological framework transforms every positive action you take into additional justification for her betrayal. Understanding this pattern reveals why so many men report feeling like they're going crazy during relationship deterioration. You're dealing with someone whose perception of reality has been systematically altered by psychological processes she doesn't even recognize. She genuinely believes her revised version of your relationship history. She truly feels justified in her growing disloyalty. This creates a situation becomes impossible. You, where rational discussion are trying to address problems based on shared reality, but she's operating from a completely different psychological framework. The woman you thought you knew has been replaced by someone whose entire worldview has shifted to support betrayal as a reasonable and necessary choice. The tragedy is that this psychological transformation often occurs in relationships that are actually quite healthy by objective standards. External observers might see a couple with normal problems working through typical challenges. But her internal psychological state has created a completely different reality, where betrayal feels not just justified, but inevitable. The timing of betrayal follows predictable patterns that most men never recognize until it's too late. Women don't randomly decide to destroy their relationships. They wait for optimal moments when the social and psychological costs of betrayal are minimized while the perceived benefits are maximized. The first optimal window occurs during major life transitions. Career changes, moving to new cities, starting graduate school, or experiencing family crises create psychological instability that makes relationship betrayal feel like just another necessary change. During these periods, she's already adjusting to new circumstances, new people, new routines. Ending or betraying a relationship becomes part of a larger life transformation rather than an isolated, destructive act. She'll frame it as personal growth. She's evolving, discovering herself, becoming the person she was always meant to be. Your relationship gets cast as something that belongs to her old life, incompatible with who she's becoming. This narrative allows her to betray you while feeling good about herself. She's not destroying something valuable. She's courageously letting go of something that's holding her back. The second window opens when she achieves financial independence or career success. Women's loyalty often correlates inversely with their economic security. When she needed your resources, your stability, your support, betrayal carried serious risks. But once she's established her own career, built her own social network, accumulated her own assets, those risks disappear. This economic independence doesn't just change her practical circumstances. It transforms her entire psychological relationship to commitment. She no longer needs to weigh the consequences of betrayal against survival concerns. Every decision can be based purely on emotional satisfaction and personal fulfillment. Watch for changes in how she talks about money and career. When she starts emphasizing her financial independence, when she begins making major purchases without consulting you, when she talks about her to take care of herself, she's psychologically preparing for a life without you. Financial independence becomes emotional permission to prioritize her own desires over relationship stability. The third window occurs during what psychologists call emotional contagion periods. When her social circle experiences relationship upheaval, her own relationship becomes vulnerable. If her friends are getting divorced, having affairs, or leaving long-term partners, she becomes exponentially more likely to follow similar patterns. This isn't conscious mimicking. It's psychological programming that made sense in ancestral environments. When other women in the tribe were changing their mating strategies, it often indicated changing environmental conditions that required similar adaptations. Modern women still respond to these social cues, even though the original evolutionary context no longer exists. Pay attention to her friend group's relationship status. Multiple divorces or breakups among her close friends create a psychological environment where betrayal becomes normalized. She's not just seeing that alternatives exist. She's watching other women successfully execute relationship exits and observing the social support they receive for doing so. The fourth window opens during what researchers call sexual market value panic. This typically occurs in women's late 30s and early 40s when they realize their attractiveness to other men is declining. The biological clock isn't just about having children, it's about maintaining options in the sexual marketplace. During this phase, any attention from other men becomes intoxicating. She's not necessarily looking for affairs, but she's desperately seeking proof that she's still desirable, still has choices, still could start over if she wanted to. This psychological need for validation makes her vulnerable to the advances of men who understand female psychology. The panic manifests in predictable ways. She becomes obsessed with her appearance, spending increasing amounts of time and money on beauty treatments, fitness, and clothing. She starts comparing herself to younger women obsessively. She begins talking about missed opportunities and road sating whether her current relationship provides not taken. Most importantly, she starts evaluating enough excitement and passion to justify staying. Here's what makes this window particularly dangerous. The men who pursue women in this psychological state are often specialists. They understand exactly what these women need to hear. They provide the excitement, attention, and validation that stable long-term relationships naturally decrease over time. They make her feel young, desirable, and alive in ways that predictable domestic partnership cannot match. The betrayal process accelerates dramatically once she begins receiving this targeted attention. Her psychology shifts from theoretical dissatisfaction to active comparison. She's no longer just unhappy with her current situation. She has a specific alternative that seems better. The fantasy becomes concrete, and concrete fantasies have a way of becoming reality. Understanding these windows allows you to recognize when your relationship enters high-risk periods. But here's the crucial insight. Trying to prevent betrayal during these windows often accelerates it. Your increased attention and effort gets interpreted as evidence that you sense the relationship is in trouble, which confirms her belief that it actually is in trouble. The paradox is that relationships are most vulnerable when men try hardest to save them. Your romantic gestures during her transition period get dismissed as attempts to hold her back. Your reassurances during her success phase get interpreted as jealousy of her achievements. Your increased attention during her social circle upheaval gets seen as possessiveness. Your efforts to reignite passion during her validation-seeking phase get compared unfavorably to the excitement provided by new admirers. This creates an impossible situation where the natural male response to relationship threat actually increases the threat. You sense something is wrong and respond with more investment, more effort, more attention. But she interprets this changed behavior as proof that the relationship was inadequate before, which justifies her growing interest in alternatives. The most sophisticated betrayals occur when women maintain the appearance of loyalty while systematically preparing for departure. She continues performing relationship duties while secretly building alternative options. She keeps you comfortable and unsuspecting while creating the infrastructure for your replacement. This preparation phase can last months, or even years. She's not ready to leave yet, but she's getting ready to be ready. She's testing other men's interest, building emotional connections outside the relationship, creating financial independence, and gradually shifting her social network to include more people who don't know you or don't like you. During this phase, she often becomes more affectionate and attentive than usual. This isn't renewed love, it's guilt management. Her increased kindness serves two psychological functions. It reduces her guilt about her secret preparations, and it keeps you from becoming suspicious about her true intentions. The final phase begins when she's secured a viable alternative. Not necessarily another man, though that's common. The alternative might be financial independence, a new career opportunity, a different social circle, or simply confidence that she can handle life without you. Once she's convinced that leaving won't leave her worse off, the betrayal becomes inevitable. At this point, every interaction gets filtered through her exit strategy. She's not trying to solve problems anymore. She's building her case for departure. Every argument becomes evidence that you're incompatible. Every compromise you offer gets dismissed as too little too late. Every expression of love gets reframed as desperation or manipulation. The cruelest aspect of this final phase is how she'll often give you opportunities to end the relationship yourself. She'll create situations where leaving would be the obvious choice, hoping you'll make the decision she's already made, but doesn't want to take responsibility for. She wants to be the victim of your departure, rather than the perpetrator of betrayal. When that doesn't work, she'll often manufacture a crisis that justifies immediate departure. A manufactured argument that escalates beyond reason. A sudden discovery of some minor transgression from your past that becomes unforgivable. An ultimatum designed to be rejected. She needs a dramatic exit that allows her to leave while maintaining her self-image as the wronged party. The psychological preparation for betrayal involves what researchers call identity shifting. She begins viewing herself less as part of a couple and more as an independent individual whose needs aren't being met. This shift happens gradually through subtle changes in language and behavior that most men never notice. Listen to how she talks about future plans. When a woman is psychologically preparing to leave, she stops using we and starts using I. Instead of, we should plan a vacation next summer, she says, I want to travel more. Instead of, we need to save money, she says, I need to focus on my finances. This linguistic shift reflects a deeper psychological transformation where she's already mentally separated from the partnership. She starts making unilateral decisions about things that used to require discussion. New friendships, social activities, financial choices, career moves. She's practicing independence while still technically committed. Each decision made without your input is psychological rehearsal for a life where your opinion doesn't matter. The betrayal process accelerates when she begins what psychologists call comparative relationship analysis. She's not just unhappy with her current situation, she's actively measuring it against alternatives, both real and imagined. Every married friend becomes a case study. Every divorced acquaintance becomes a cautionary tale or inspiration story, depending on the outcome. Social media transforms this analysis into a constant stream of evidence that better options exist. She's not just scrolling through feeds anymore. She's conducting market research. That college friend who posts about her amazing new boyfriend. That co-worker who seems so happy after her divorce. That influencer living her best single life. Each post becomes data supporting her growing belief that she's settling for less than she deserves. But here's where female psychology becomes truly sophisticated. She doesn't just compare your relationship to others. She compares the current version of your relationship to idealized memories of how it used to be. The early excitement, the constant attention, the feeling of being pursued and desired. She conveniently forgets that those feelings naturally diminish in long-term relationships and instead treats their absence as evidence of relationship failure. This creates an impossible standard. You're not just competing with other men, you're competing with a romanticized version of yourself from years ago, when everything was new and uncertain. The stability and comfort you've built together gets reframed as boredom and stagnation. The security she once valued becomes the prison she needs to escape. The betrayal mentality fundamentally alters how she interprets your behavior. Actions that once seemed loving now appear possessive. Gestures that once felt romantic now seem calculated. Words that once brought comfort now sound like manipulation. She's not consciously choosing to see you negatively. Her psychological framework has shifted to filter everything through a lens of dissatisfaction and justification. This reinterpretation extends to physical intimacy in ways that devastate men who don't understand what's happening. Sexual desire requires psychological attraction, and psychological attraction requires respect and admiration. Once she's entered the betrayal mindset, those feelings begin evaporating. She goes through the motions to maintain appearances, but the genuine desire is gone. Men often misinterpret this as a temporary rough patch or stress-related issue. They try harder to please her, become more attentive, suggest counseling or romantic getaways. But these efforts miss the fundamental reality. She's not having sexual problems. She's having relationship problems that manifest sexually. Her body is responding to her psychological state, not to your performance or technique. The withdrawal of physical intimacy serves another psychological function. It creates distance that makes betrayal easier to justify. When she's not being physically intimate with you, she's not bonding with you. The oxytocin and other hormones that create attachment aren't being released. She's biochemically preparing herself for separation, while consciously telling herself she's just not in the mood lately. Female betrayal often involves what researchers call triangulation. She doesn't just leave one relationship for another, she creates overlapping emotional connections that provide security during the transition. This might be an old friend who becomes a confidant, a coworker who provides emotional support, or a new acquaintance who offers excitement and validation. These relationships serve as stepping stones. She's not ready to leave you yet, but she's building the emotional infrastructure that will make leaving possible. Each connection provides something she claims to be missing in your relationship. One person understands her professionally. Another appreciates her intellectually. Someone else finds her attractive and desirable. The genius of this strategy is that each relationship can be defended as innocent friendship. She's not cheating. She's just connecting with people who understand her. But collectively, these relationships are replacing the emotional functions you used to serve. She's distributing her emotional dependency across multiple people so that losing you won't leave her isolated or vulnerable. This triangulation process explains why women often seem to move on from relationships much faster than men. While you're devastated and struggling to understand what happened, she's already surrounded by people who've been providing emotional support throughout the betrayal process. She didn't lose her entire support system when she lost you. She just removed one element from a network she'd been building for months or years. The most sophisticated betrayals involve what psychologists call gradual devaluation. She doesn't suddenly decide you're terrible. Instead, she slowly reduces the value she places on your positive qualities while amplifying the significance of your flaws. This process happens so gradually that she doesn't recognize it as manipulation of her own perceptions. Your generosity becomes people-pleasing weakness. Your ambition becomes selfish neglect of the relationship. Your stability becomes boring predictability. Your devotion becomes desperate neediness. Every strength gets reframed as a weakness or character flaw that justifies her growing dissatisfaction. Meanwhile, qualities that never bothered her before suddenly become unforgivable problems. The way you chew food becomes disgusting. Your sense of humor becomes immature. Your social skills become embarrassing. Your interests become stupid or selfish. She's not consciously choosing to find these things annoying. Her brain is restructuring her perceptions to support the betrayal she's already considering subconsciously. This devaluation process serves a crucial psychological function. It allows her to maintain her self-image as a reasonable person making rational decisions. She's not destroying a good relationship for selfish reasons. She's finally recognizing that the relationship was never as good as she thought it was. This reframed narrative makes betrayal feel not just justified, but necessary for her well-being. The devaluation extends to shared experiences and memories. Events that once brought joy now get reinterpreted through a negative lens. That romantic vacation becomes evidence that you her after-buy were triinjection. The house you built together becomes a symbol of how you trapped her in domesticity. The children you're raising become proof that you use family obligations to control her choices. This memory revision isn't conscious lying. Her brain is literally restructuring her recollections to create psychological consistency. She needs to believe that leaving you is the right decision, which requires believing that staying would be the wrong decision. The mind accomplishes this by editing the past to support present desires. Understanding this psychological process explains why attempts to remind her of good times together often backfire during relationship crises. You're trying to access memories that her brain has either deleted or recontextualized. When you bring up a happy moment, she doesn't feel nostalgia. She feels annoyed that you're trying to manipulate her with selective memory, even though that's exactly what her own mind is doing in reverse. The betrayal process reaches its final stage when she begins what researchers call exit strategy implementation. She's moved beyond preparation and begun actively creating the conditions for departure. This phase is characterized by increased secrecy, emotional withdrawal, and systematic destruction of relationship foundations. She starts hiding more aspects of her life from you. Phone calls taken in private, computer passwords changed, social media activity concealed, credit card statements scrutinized to ensure privacy. She's not necessarily doing anything wrong yet, but she's creating the infrastructure for activities she doesn't want you to discover. The emotional withdrawal becomes more pronounced during this phase. She stops sharing her thoughts, feelings, hopes, and fears with you. Problems that once would have been discussed together now get processed with friends, family, or new confidants. She's practicing emotional independence while still physically present in the relationship. Most devastating is how she begins systematically dismantling the shared vision you built together. Future plans get cancelled or postponed indefinitely. Joint goals become individual pursuits. Couple traditions get abandoned. She's erasing the blueprint of your life together to make room for alternative possibilities. This destruction often gets disguised as personal growth or life reevaluation. She's not sabotaging your relationship. She's discovering what she really wants from life. She's not abandoning shared dreams. She's being honest about what actually makes her happy. This reframing allows her to destroy everything you've built together while maintaining her self-image as someone making healthy, authentic choices. The final betrayal, when it comes, often feels sudden and shocking to men who haven't recognized these psychological patterns. But from her perspective, it's the inevitable conclusion of a process that's been building for months or years. She's not impulsively destroying something good. She's finally taking action on a decision she made long ago, but couldn't fully admit to herself until now. The psychological sophistication of female betrayal reaches its peak when she begins what researchers call narrative reconstruction. This isn't just changing how she thinks about your relationship. This is actively rewriting the story of her entire life to position herself as the hero who finally escaped an oppressive situation. Every conversation becomes an opportunity to test her new narrative with others. She starts sharing carefully curated versions of your relationship problems with friends, family, and co-workers. These aren't honest discussions seeking advice. These are strategic presentations designed to build support for her eventual departure while painting you as the obstacle to her happiness. The stories she tells follow predictable patterns. Minor disagreements become major conflicts. Your reasonable boundaries become controlling behavior. Your efforts to maintain the relationship become desperate attempts to trap her. Your expressions of concern become emotional manipulation. She's not lying exactly, but she's presenting selective truths arranged to support predetermined conclusions. This narrative building serves multiple psychological functions. It creates external validation for her internal dissatisfaction. When others agree that she deserves better, it confirms what her mind has already decided. It also builds the social support network she'll need after betrayal. These people won't question her decision to leave because they've been programmed to see it as liberation from an unhealthy situation. Watch how she describes your relationship to others when she thinks you can't hear. The language reveals everything. When she stops defending you in social situations, when she begins sharing intimate relationship details with casual acquaintances, when she starts seeking validation for complaints rather than solutions for problems, the betrayal process has entered its final phase. The most insidious aspect of this narrative reconstruction is how it affects her interaction with your subchildren. She begins undermining your authority while positioning herself as the parent who truly understands their needs. This isn't conscious manipulation of the children. It's psychological preparation for a custody battle she's already planning in her subconscious mind. She starts making unilateral decisions about parenting issues that previously required discussion. Educational choices, extracurricular activities, medical decisions, social arrangements. Each independent choice is practice for a future where your input isn't required or desired. She's training herself and the children for life without your involvement. The children become unwitting participants in her psychological preparation. She begins processing her relationship dissatisfaction through conversations with them that seem innocent, but serve deeper purposes. Questions about whether they're happy at home, discussions about how some families are different from others, stories about friends whose parents separated and everyone ended up happier. These conversations plant seeds that will make her eventual departure seem natural and beneficial rather than destructive and selfish. The children aren't being directly turned against you, but they're being psychologically prepared for a narrative where leaving you was the best decision for everyone involved. Female betrayal psychology includes what researchers call responsibility displacement. As the betrayal approaches, she begins systematically transferring blame for her choices onto external factors. She's not choosing to destroy the relationship. Circumstances are forcing her to make difficult decisions. She's not being selfish. She's finally being honest about what she needs to be happy. Your behavior becomes the primary vehicle for this responsibility displacement. Every minor flaw gets magnified into a relationship-ending problem. Every request becomes an unreasonable demand. Every expression of needs becomes evidence of your selfishness. She needs you to be the villain in her story, so her psychology transforms normal human imperfection into unacceptable character defects. This displacement extends to timing and circumstances. She doesn't choose when to leave based on her convenience or preparation. External events force her hand, a job opportunity she can't refuse, a family crisis that requires her attention, a personal revelation that demands immediate action. The betrayal becomes something that happened to her rather than something she orchestrated. The responsibility displacement protects her self-image while justifying actions that would otherwise create unbearable guilt. She's not abandoning her family. She's responding to circumstances beyond her control. She's not being cruel. She's being forced into difficult decisions by your inadequacies and external pressures. This psychological mechanism explains why women often seem genuinely surprised by their partner's shock and devastation. From her perspective, the problems were obvious, the solutions were attempted, and the outcome was inevitable. She doesn't understand how you could be blindsided by something she's been building toward for months or years. The betrayal mentality creates what psychologists call emotional anesthesia. As she psychologically prepares for departure, her capacity for empathy toward you begins shutting down. This isn't conscious cruelty. It's biological protection against the guilt and pain that would otherwise prevent her from taking actions she believes are necessary for her survival and happiness. "I'm sorry, but I can't help with that,"